We've now reduced our points slider value method to just a few lines of code. But good news, there's a way to reduce the code by a few more characters thanks to an amazingly handy feature of Swift called type inference. Let's take a look.
All right, let's look at this line of code right here. So we say we're creating a constant called difference, and we're setting it to the absolute value of self.target minus slider value. Well, it turns out that Swift is pretty smart, and Swift knows that self.target is an integer, it knows slider value is an integer, and it knows that absolute value takes an integer, this expression evaluates to an integer, and it returns an integer. So it can compute automatically that if you're setting difference equal to this value, it's going to be an integer. So because of that, you don't actually need to specify in this case that it's an integer. I can actually delete that and the code still works. Let me hit Command B just to make sure it still builds, and everything works fine because Swift knows this should be an integer. And I can verify that by holding down the Option button. Just remember how I can hold down that to get help on a certain item and click on difference. And look, it says difference is an int. This has been figured out automatically for us by the compiler because we're setting it to an expression that evaluates to an int. And we can do this a lot of places in our code to make it a lot shorter and concise and easier to read. And that's actually a best practice in Swift development, to not specify the type if you don't have to. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it there because, again, it can calculate that 100, which is an integer, minus difference, which is an integer, is also an integer. I can also click on that to verify it. And since we're setting these all to initial values, I don't need it there either. So I can delete these and have the code be even shorter. All right, let's go to contentview.swift, and we can clean up some of these as well. We're setting this to false, which is a Boolean, so I don't need to say that it's a Boolean. We're setting this to 50.0, which is a double. The .0 is important here because if I set it to 50, it would be an int, but since I said 50.0, it's a double, so I go ahead and delete that. And we're setting this to a game, so we don't need to say that it's a game right there as well. And there's another case that we've done this down here. Here we're saying it's int, but we don't need to do that. Another thing we can do is the compiler is smart enough to figure out when you're referring to a property if it's a property on the current class or if it's a local variable. So a lot of times you don't even need to use self dot. So here we're saying self dot slider value, but if we don't put self dot, Swift is smart enough to say, since I don't see a local variable called slider value, you must be referring to the property that exists on this instance, and so you don't need to put self dot there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the self dot in those cases. Let's see if there's any others that we can get rid of. I've switched to the fourth tab here, which is a way you can search for all text throughout your project, and I'm just searching for self dot, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete all of these cases here. There are some times where you do need to specify self, but usually Swift will warn you in those cases. Yeah. Okay, there we go. And leave it there as well. And I'm just going to hit Command B to make sure I haven't broken anything and everything's still built successfully. All right, so our code is already looking a lot more concise thanks to Swift's type inference, but I want to show you how we can reduce our method here to calculate the points down to just one line of code. So we have a bunch of constants here in a row, and so we can simplify this. So instead of making a constant for awarded points and returning awarded points, we can just take this and return that directly. Okay, so, and then instead of creating a difference and then return 100 minus the difference, we can simplify that by cutting that, pasting it there. And there's actually one more way that we can simplify this. If you have a method that just has a single line of code in it, you don't actually need to put the return beforehand because it will just assume you're trying to return whatever the value of that expression is. So since it has just one line of code, I can remove the return as well. And now you can see that this points method has become extremely short. So we've come a long way, haven't we, from that long if-else statement to this nice, terse, nice line of code. It's looking really good. So let me run my unit test with Command U. All look good. I'm going to run it with Command R. Trying to aim for 83, hit me. I was 4 away, so I got 96 points. Awesome.